Whoop. So, hello. I am so excited. We are live tonight. We are getting excited, talking about important things that we need to know to get to your life in Portugal. I want to start with introducing myself. My name is Colleen Showalter, and I'm the CEO of Portugal the Place. And we are a company that assists folks with relocating to Portugal with all the elements that you need to know to be able to make a soft landing when you get here. And we are really excited. We have Deborah here with us. Do we have a banner up for you? I think we should. Uh, Deborah, uh, how about you introduce yourself so that you can give all your great background on what wonderful things you
Well,
do?
thank you. Thank you, Colleen. Well, I'll try to be brief. I'm Deborah Dahab, and I'm an expat coach and intercultural psychologist. So I basically help people prepare, fulfill, and adjust for it during an international relocation. I have been a foreigner, expat, immigrant, to pick your term, I don't care, for over 40 years. I'm originally from Brazil, and I lived in the States, in France, in England, in Spain, in Brazil, of course, and in Portugal. This is my second time. The order is mixed up, but you get the idea. And here I am today.
That's fantastic. And we know each other because you have some fantastic services that you provide to our clients. They have an opportunity to work with you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, Colleen and I, about over a year ago, we started this partnership where everyone who is a client at Portugal the Place gets access to two of my courses that are very relevant for the scouting and figuring out whereabouts to live in Portugal. So the courses are called How to Decide Where to Live and How to Prepare a Scouting Trip for Success. So I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Everyone who is a client of Portugal the Place gets immediate access to these courses. So while they are doing, waiting for the itinerary and all that stuff, waiting to get things done, they can get really their hands dirty and, roll up
Yep.
their sleeves and really prepare. Preparing the mindset, preparing practical aspects. And each one of these courses includes a 1 hour call with me. So everyone gets a chance to talk to me, troubleshoot, ask questions before the trip and then after the trip to integrate, to debrief, to figure out what's going to happen moving forward. So we've been doing this for over a year now. And as far as I know, the feedback has been very positive.
Yes, absolutely. We're thrilled to have this portion involved because one of the things, like we're going to talk about today, moving with children, is that there are a lot of elements that go into this process, right? We have the physical part, the financial part, all the logistics, but then there's this big emotional and mental preparation. And now you're adding little ones that have to be considered as well. And that can be a substantial part of your own mind, getting prepared. So coming to you to have this conversation, not only are you a coach working with tons of people all around the world, not just Portugal, that are moving, and then you also have a child yourself. So you're navigating this process here. So we thought that this would be something that would really be relevant and that we could really get into. I am just putting out a note here because I want to make sure that we have all the information that we need before we get started. Do we have a link, Fiona, for Deborah's information? We've got Fiona in the background. She is making sure that we are up and running. And I want to make sure during this whole conversation that we have Deborah's information linked as well. So I was just making sure we had that. Are you ready to dive in, Deborah? Do we want to talk about kids moving to Portugal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I also was a kid moving abroad. I'm a
Oh,
third cultural kid. So I have both views of being a kid and being a mom. So
it is a really good angle to have for sure. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is the logistics. Let's say that right now you were in the process, you've decided Portugal is your place and you are ready to pick a location. When you're looking at this, we talk about the nuts and bolts of this with our folks. We talk about the lists, making sure that you know which steps you need to take in which order. What would be something right off the bat that you would advise people to start thinking about from more of that kind of preparation mindset, how to communicate this with your kids? What would you advise?
Okay. So I think it really depends on the age of the child. Okay. For smaller kids, and before I start explaining this, a huge disclaimer: I'm not a specialist in children, but I'm a mom. Okay. So I don't work with kids. What I do work are with parents and caretakers and adults who can help their kids. Okay. So huge disclaimer: anything I say here, I'm not coming from a child psychologist place. Okay.
Right,
So I
exactly.
wanted to put that out there.
Exactly. We're talking about the
Okay.
adults preparing the family
Exactly, exactly.
for
So I
sure.
just really want to make that clear before you're like, oh, what are your credentials? I don't have credentials for that other than having been a kid abroad and having a child abroad. Okay.
Ex-
And of course, I'm an intercultural psychologist, but I work with adults. But I want to make that crystal clear so there's no
Absolutely.
misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
So to answer your question, I think it depends on the age of the child. So younger children, 2, 3, 4 year olds, they don't really know where they are really sometimes, you know. It can be sometimes like a challenge linguistically, but they're learning the language. So how I see the most challenging is from maybe 5 and older, because that's when they start to get their sense of identity. They start to have friends. So, you know, and a lot of their sense of worth and how they feel is related to where they belong. And the sense of belonging is something very intense when we're moving abroad. We lose that for a while, at least. Um, and so for like from 5 or older, and again, these are like generalizations because every parent will know if their kid is mature or not. Because, you know, I've seen 18-year-olds behave like 5-year-olds and sometimes 8-year-olds that are super mature. That said, I think it's really important when you're dealing with kids and preparing for a move abroad to help them feel empowered in the situation. So, one of the things that we really suffer is when we have no say in the matter. Oh, I'm going to move. I have no say into where, how, what, when. And yeah, as kids, that's part of our life of being kids
Right.
with
Right.
adults.
Of course, it's part of it.
But but if you do want to have kind of like have the kids on board, is to let them make age appropriate decisions, have them participate in the process. So have them, for example, have them decide what color their bedroom walls is going to be, have them decide on the furniture or whatever is age appropriate, because that gives them a sense of empowerment and they have some say in the matter. It's kind of like when we're dealing with toddlers, you know, the technique of, are you going to take a bath now or in 5 minutes?
Right.
Right? They're going
Choice.
to take a bath, but they can choose if it's now or in 5 minutes. They have some say in the matter. It's the same thing. Like, we're going to move, but you can decide what color your bedroom walls are going to be.
Well,
So it's
and we
not
find
such an imposition. Does that make sense?
absolutely. We find that with the location scouting. So we have about a 50-50 on people that bring their children with them or decide to do the location scouting on their own. And I can say when the children are coming, when they're the older children, you know, like you said, older than 5, 6 years old, when they're looking, building a scouting trip that's intentional so that they are participating. So they're not just going from place to place and, oh, we're in a car for all this time. But what, you know, factoring in what are their interests, what are they going to be looking for, how do we make them feel more comfortable? Because to your point, there's belonging and then there's fitting in, and those are very different feelings, and helping kids get that sense that they can find something familiar, something they connect with,
Mhm.
whether it's a ballet school that's in a potential
Yeah.
town, or maybe they have all of a sudden they see the same movie that's like Portugal's movies are in English, and you see the signs, and Frozen is in English, and it's the same Disney movies that are out, and all of a sudden it becomes a little more familiar. And then the children on the scouting trips feel like they have more of a buy-in. So I do think if you can do it, in my opinion, based on all of our experience with the scouting, bringing your kids with you on that scouting trip, at least one of them, if you can coordinate that, can really go a long way for the children not to see it as such a, you know, like far away thing. When it comes to moving, they can relate to where they're going, if that's possible.
Absolutely. And it's a fine line between overwhelming the child and bringing them in, right? So each
For their part.
parent will know
Exactly.
where's the balance is. So just sometimes when you give too much choice, it can be overwhelming. But this will depend on so many different issues. So
Exactly. Pablo has a question here for you, Deborah. Do you see that there?
I do. Hi, Pablo. So Pablo's asking me if I've observed any challenges in children's academic performance when adjusting to life abroad. I think I can speak, for example, my daughter goes to an international school, so I can see what other kids that have moved to Portugal. So I'm basing my answer on that observation. I think it depends a lot again on their age. So the older they are, the more difficult it probably is, because unless they are coming from an international curricula, which kind of like creates the baseline, but if they're coming from a local curricula, there are these adjustments. And it also depends on their proficiency of the language, and or if they are in an environment that only speaks the local language or has a bilingual situation. Um, so yes, it tends to suffer. And what happens, for example, I'll give an example of what I see in many of my Brazilian friends that come from Brazil with kids and go to the public system in Portugal. And it's the same language, right? The difference is that the the disciplines and the schooling in Brazil is a little less intense than here in Portugal. So what happens is sometimes they put the child a year back, a year behind, kind of like to catch up, because there are so many different adjustments, not only academic but social, you name it, right? Every single area in your life changes. So some people decide to hold their child back 1 year to catch up with everything, even if they speak the same language, and the results tend to be quite positive.
I've seen that too with clients that have relocated. Of course, it really depends on the child. I think the social part as well as the academic part are such equal components to a child's ability to adjust. But there definitely seems to be, if you don't take into account the fact that they're going to have a lot of changes hitting them all at the same time, their school, their home, their family life, everything that's happening, we're all traumatized as adults. We come over and it takes a while to settle in. That even something as basic as ordering a pizza can be overwhelming when you first arrive. You're like, ah. So if you layer all of that and then you put a child into school, which is already, that's putting them in social situations and all of that, we do see, people that really are pausing and making sure that the children are considered. Do we need to give them another year? What kind of support do they have? It's not just international school or local school or public private school. It's really the child in our experience. What we're seeing is you, as a parent, where your child's thresholds are, and then working towards those, I think, is what's making the most success for our clients. And I know that we also have a lot of choices here. There's a lot of school options in Portugal.
There are, yeah. And it's also, I think about what are the long-term goals of the family. So a lot of people ask me, oh, I want to integrate. First is like, what is your long-term goal? Are you here like for the long run and to grow old here? Or is this maybe a stepping stone to get a European passport and go to another country? Which there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Nothing wrong. So depending on the goal of the family goal in the medium long term, then that probably should inform the schooling decision as well. So if you're not planning to stay like 5, 10 years in Portugal, maybe it's not worth going through the public system if they're going to have to adjust again in another situation. Maybe it's better to go into an IB curriculum or something like that, where you can pretty much find that anywhere in the world. So it also depends on what the family wants out of the move and how they see themselves in the medium long term.
Absolutely. And I know that Pablo here had another question. Are there any potential issues or challenges, and could bringing or shipping their favorite toys or games be beneficial? Well, I can certainly speak to games, because even as young adults, so my daughter is 22 and she moved over when she was 20. And one of the first things we all like to do family games, and we didn't think to bring any with us beyond a deck of cards. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, Monopoly, Trivia Pursuit, anything you buy in the store is in another language. So that's good or bad, but definitely I would pack, if I had young children that were moving, I would pack favorite toys and familiar games to keep that family experience happening, because that consistency is what it really is about, is making them feel at home, right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that ties into that sense also of empowerment and control. So if you tell the child, you choose what you want to bring, then they're in charge of that part. They feel part of the process.
And we've had a lot of clients that have shared, and this has been something that's been really successful, is they would put aside a bin or a box or whatever they're packing in they have two things. They have the suitcase, and then they have the long term. So there's the immediate things you bring over, and then there are the things, and this is your box. You get to take the things you want and you get to place them in there, and then you get to see it when it arrives. And you also want to plan for the immediate things. You certainly don't want to pack that favorite comfort toy in a you pack we ship crate.
No, absolutely.
So it's really having 2 layers and preparing for the immediate, and then that surprise that's going to bring them that sense of joy again 4 months later, or whatever time that packing crate arrives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then making sure you think about the time, because a little one's interest 6 months when they're 6 years old, and then 6 months later when your shipping things arrive, it's going to be a little different. So those toys too may change of importance as well. So looks like we have a question about tips for moving with teens. So Liz, what do we think, Deborah?
Okay. So moving with teens is probably very different. So there are a couple of things that I suggested to some of my clients in this situation. First of all, it's really crucial to create closure. So it's super important to say proper goodbyes to friends, to family, have a goodbye party, have a scrapbook with pictures, because when you are moving abroad or any transition for that matter, but I'm applying it to our situation, and this is not me, this is William Bridges. It's his concept. Go check out the book Managing Transitions by William Bridges. It is amazing. It is part of the recommended reading in my Master Your Move program. What he says is that there are 3 phases in a transition, any transition in our lives: the ending, the neutral zone, and the beginning. So it starts at the end. The transition starts with closure. Then after the closure, there is a period of limbo. You're not there, you're not here, you're not there yet, everything's up in the air. And then after that period, there is a period when the actual new phase begins. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because for teens, it's super important to create closure. A lot of their sense of belonging, self-worth is tied to their environment, to their friends. Create closure, say goodbyes, create a connection plan where they're in touch with their friends, so they feel connected. And today, with all this technology, it's a lot easier than just writing letters when I was a teen. So, so it's feasible. Now, another thing with teens is that communicate with children in all ages, but teens usually are mature enough to understand that there are typical phases of adjustment. The beginning is going to be amazing. It's the honeymoon. Then there's going to be a slump. You're going to feel awkward. You're not going to have friends enough. It's going to be, everything's going to be weird. You're going to miss things. That's the cultural shock phase. Then you're slowly going to start to adjust, and then there's new normal. When you communicate that with a teen or a child who is old enough to understand, when you know what to expect, it's so much easier than these things just punching you in the face when they happen.
That's a great.
Talk to them. This is what typically happens. Communicate. Ask them, what are you going through right now? Use humor. Like, oh, are you in cultural shock yet? Diffuse the tension, because there are going to be hard moments. And with teens and with all children, but especially with teens, is communicate, communicate, communicate. Usually our kids are not born with the vocabulary to share what they're feeling.
Okay.
They might not know the difference between anxiety and excitement. They might not know the difference between fear and sadness.
And that
Because
sadness,
sometimes we don't.
right? Like,
Because sometimes,
yeah, like sadness is okay. Like, also validating
yeah,
that being
exactly.
leaving doesn't mean that going to the new place isn't wonderful. You can have both feelings, and I think
exactly. And there are moments where it's gonna suck.
yes,
It's gonna suck sometimes. And what's the big picture? That's when you go back and you think about, what is the long-term goal? What did we do this for? And the teen usually is mature enough to tap into that and have a goal for him or herself.
absolutely.
Like, what do they want out of this?
And what about
Now,
Lisbon? The question also had, like, are there
yeah.
teen centers, any kind of active community in Lisbon
Well,
specifically? You live in Lisbon?
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I know how to answer this, because I'm not in contact with a lot of teens. I would say that typically it has to do with their school environment. Well, I can tell from, my friends that have teenagers, or either an after school activity like sports or arts, or like music or something like that. For example, if the international school that I know quite well, the classes go from 8:30 in the morning to 6 o'clock at night. So
Right.
it's just school environment. It's
Right.
it's who you meet at school.
Well, and that, I think, is a good point. And I'm sure you've seen this. One thing that I feel that my folks with teens have had to adjust to is the level of freedom and independence that the teenager has in Portugal in different ways. I'm really surprised still. I'll go into a cafe and see kids that are teenagers drinking coffee. They'll be having a coffee and they'll do their homework,
Yeah.
and they ride the city buses. There's a little different, and it is an adjustment for the adults, I think, because there's, for my friends in my community that have teenagers, all of a sudden there's this, like, release of this hold on your children that is different than what you have in the States. There's an expectation that they are going to guide a lot of their own learning, that they can go into a cafe and grab a coffee and do work, that they go on the public bus. Teens seem to be more mature here in a way, like they seem not mature emotionally, but they seem to have more freedom in some ways. So that can be intimidating when you're moving with your kids and all of a sudden they're like, go on the bus. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I see what you mean. A lot of my friends from Brazil, they have a similar situation, because in Brazil also people usually don't take public transportation because of security reasons and all that. So it is like, it is freeing, and of course, sometimes parents who tend to helicopter a bit more have to let go of it. But that's part of the learning curve as well. And on the same token, Portugal is a very family-oriented culture. So it's not common to see, like, teen communities like you would see in the States, because people are very family oriented. So kids, teenagers during the weekends, they will have lunch, dinner with their grandparents. They will go to their grandparents' house. And in the States, this is not so common to have extended family so present in day-to-day life. And this is also an adjustment. For example, exchange students that come from other European countries and come to Portugal, they have a great time from Monday to Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday, everyone goes to their homes
Right.
and to their families and to their childhood friends, and these students are left alone. So this is something you would never, or I can't say never, you would rarely see in the States, right? Because in a university, people stay there, they just go home for the holidays or for, something like that. And that's not the case. People, young adults or university students, and also because it is a small country, even if you do live away from your study away from your home, it's quite easy to go back for the weekend. It's not like you
Right.
study in Berkeley and your family lives in New
Or something.
York.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, and I think one thing too is a lot of teens have jobs. I think that's something to recognize. We see a lot of teenagers, 16, 17, working in the restaurants, working. Portuguese
Mhm.
youth are working, and that can throw off the cadence too of getting into a rhythm, because we do have that come up a fair amount that, for whatever reason, obviously you may have a language barrier that would preclude you from getting a job. You're also here at a different way with the visas. So there is this other feeling too for teens that can feel a little disconnected, because those
Mhm.
students will be going to work. And then they're also, so you've got the family component, you may have the work component. It's different when you can't get a job. Maybe that's something to be prepared for. Your 16, 17-year-old, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, until they get the language skills and are settled in a different way, you should be prepared for the fact that they're not going to be able to go out and get that traditional teenage job.
Yeah.
That's going to be
Yeah.
something to prepare for.
Absolutely. You're
Unless they
completely
work,
right. It's
unless they work with
sorry.
expats. Unless they work with expats or find a job in a place where they speak primarily the language, their first language. So that's something that
Yeah.
I come up with some of our teenage kids that have moved, that they don't
Mhm.
have, where are they going to get their spending money? How are they going to earn that extra, money to have in their pocket? It's not the same as if they were in the States and they could go and maybe, pick up a job mall or something like that. So I think that's
Yeah.
something for people that are parents of teens, is have a plan. What will you do
Mhm.
to help them have that little bit of freedom when they're that age,
Mhm.
and not make them feel like they don't have the option to earn something?
Mhm. Mhm. That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
It's
Yeah,
it's
lot of differences, a lot of
I
adjustment.
I think one thing too, like picking a location. So, Deborah, you're in the greater Lisbon area, and you know that there are a lot of school choices there. But with the folks you coach and the folks that we encounter, they're looking all over the country. Have you had any experiences with people trying to figure out, like, if you do want a more rural life, or if you want to live in a less populated area, the difference of integrating into a smaller community that doesn't have the support of an international school?
Mhm. Yeah, well, it depends on what you consider integration. Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm a coach here, so I have to coach. Sorry. Um,
exactly.
so you have to define what is it you want. Okay, first you have to know what you want, and then you decide when you can get that, or where you can get that, and how you can get that. So what I say is like, oh, I want to integrate, but I want to be with the locals. I want to, and then when they are deciding where to get a haircut, oh, but I want someone who speaks English because not everyone can cut my hair. And when they're looking for a dentist, oh, but I have this problem, so I need someone who speaks English so I can really tell. And when they're looking for a pediatrician for their child, oh, but it's like I'd rather someone who speaks English. And there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong, but it's funny because yeah, you want to integrate, you want to be with the locals, etc. But when you know when things are, you feel more vulnerable or things are more difficult, then you want your local, and that's fine. That's fine. There's no judgment here. We're all like that. That's why I encourage people to think what integration means for you.
That's a
And
great.
and if integration means, I want to have a little bit, and technically in intercultural psychology, that's what it means. I won't give you a lecture, don't worry. But technically, in integration in intercultural psychology means that you have a balance between wanting to have contact with, in this jargon, is the host country, which would be Portugal, and a balance in keeping your own identity, which would be, for example, speaking English. So there's nothing that technically is integration. Okay. But it can be different things for different people. And again, what are your long term goals? If your long term goals are to live a freer life, maybe a little bit off the grid, you had a dream of having a farm and growing stuff and having animals. Well, if that's your dream, then you got to go to the rural areas. Can't do that in the middle of Alfama, can you?
Right,
Probably not. So, and then the caveat comes with, it's probably going to be a tiny public school there.
right.
Do you want to do that? Do, how does that play into your goals as a family and the goals? So it's all about, understanding what you want and the trade offs to get it.
Yeah, because they don't have Portuguese as a second language. These are not standard courses in public schools. In
English,
the
you mean?
no, well, in the United States, English is a
Oh,
second.
yeah.
But in
Okay.
Portugal, if you go to a public school, you don't get to walk in and just automatically say, my child doesn't speak Portuguese, so therefore we
No.
need Portuguese as a second language. There's no
Yeah.
PSL as
No,
opposed
no,
to
no, absolutely. Yeah, there
so
might be two teachers there that barely speak English.
right. And we've noticed in our scouting and working with our clients have relocated across Portugal as the international community has kind of developed in perhaps a certain area. All of a sudden, one particular school may all be able to say we can coach or tutor or assist, but this isn't like a general. This isn't a consistent plan within the Portuguese public school system.
No,
So if you've
no.
got a little 4-year-old, that's coming in, that's a completely different experience because boy, they're like sponges. The language just, for most little ones, so jealous to see how quickly they can take the language in.
Yeah.
But if you've got a 10-year-old and you want to move to a rural location, the schooling options will become much more limited. And that's when, to your point, how is that going to work, especially if you've landed there, it doesn't work, then what do you do? Type of a
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So to avoid that is to really think through before you actually do it. It's like, okay, what do I want? How do I get there? Okay, if I want to, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's just reflection and making informed decisions, because that's pretty much what I help my clients with, is like understanding and articulating what they want and helping them create an action plan to get there. And they're going to be good things, bad things, horrible things, fantastic things, such as life. Life is the same anywhere you go, because we bring it with us, and nothing is perfect. And there are inconsistencies in the public system, in the public educational system. We're seeing right now, for a while now, massive strikes.
Mhm.
Schools are
Teacher strike.
closed. So you got to take that into account. Okay, I want my child to be in the public system and be with other people. Great. But do you know the situation of the teachers there, how much they earn, that they have to go, they live in Guarda and have to teach in Lagos? That's kind of like opposite directions of
Right.
Portugal.
But
And
that they don't choose. They're assigned where
yeah,
they're
they're assigned, and they have very few actually can choose closer to their place of residence. Do you know that you cannot choose where your child is going to study? That it depends on your area of residence or work. So all these things have to be known thoroughly before making decisions.
well, and that's a
And
key point that I don't want to miss. You brought up a great point, because a lot of our clients and the people we're speaking to right now are considering Portugal. And there is definitely folks, there's two schools of thought. I pick a location that I fell in love with, and then I figure out the schools, or I focus on the school, and then that becomes the location that I move to.
Mhm.
And there's not a right or wrong way, but I think being prepared for the fact that to register your children for school, you have to have certain steps in place. You can't just be like, oh, I'm registering and I have no proof of address. No, not, there's a
That
whole
doesn't
process.
happen.
It doesn't happen, but
Yeah.
it's similar to the US. You couldn't just go to a school
Yeah,
district.
school districts. Yeah.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
to do that. But it does mean that you have to, with children, you're not going to have that, well, I might live there for 12 months and then maybe find somewhere else that I like, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You want to really hone in on that location, because again, they're going to make a huge move to another country, into a school, and have 12 months of adjustment. And then if that isn't the location that you want to be in, then doing it again and changing them again to another area, that
Super
could be pretty
difficult.
dramatic, especially
Yeah.
if you've got preteens and
Yeah.
teens, that would be really difficult. So in my opinion, it's a fit. You have to take both into account at the same time. Location scouting is important. You certainly want to live there. I mean, and you need to know if you can afford to live there.
Absolutely.
And then the school part, because
Yeah.
without both in a plan, it could become a really difficult situation.
Yeah. Well, can I bring something in? When people take the How to Decide Where to Live course, they learn a thing called the criteria funnel, where you go beyond your wish list. So you have your wish list. I want this, I want that. Then you start to narrow it down, and you actually start your search not from what you want, but what you need and cannot live without.
Right. The must-haves.
That's where you start the non-negotiables, actually.
Mhm.
The non-negotiables. So if for you, it is non-negotiable that your child goes to a bilingual school because you want them to have English also and keep their English, that in itself will limit your area.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So
That's a good point.
if your non-negotiable is to live a rural life a little bit off the grid, if that's your non-negotiable, that will determine the educational system. So when you do apply the methodology that Portugal the Places clients have access to,
Exactly.
it's boom, 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 boom. It's a no-brainer. You just follow the steps and you find out what you're non, and then you go to the rural area and you realize, oh, you know what? Maybe the school is really not. And then you go back to your criteria funnel and review it. And you go but you have a system. It's not just things all over the place. You have a system to go through that, because it's all about, what do you want? If
Absolutely.
you know what you want, you'll find a way to get there, and you'll understand the caveats and the trade-offs. If you don't know exactly what you want, anything can go, or nothing is good enough.
Exactly. And in setting yourself up for failure if you don't know what your non-negotiables are. And I do see this, time and time again, and it's something I'm hoping we could really stress here, is there's a lot of folks that are looking at leaving their country to move to Portugal to leave something. Maybe there's a very valid concern about violence and safety for children and things like that. And Portugal truly is a very safe destination and a place to live. And it's certainly one I encourage people to consider, but that can't be the only reason that you want to move. In my opinion, and you've taught me this a lot, it's not running from something, moving to something, and helping people sort that out. And I think that's it's one thing for single people, couples, whatever, but then when you're also layering children into it, I feel like it has to be a big conversation between the partners, the parents, whoever's making these decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, when you ask someone, why do you want to move? They will have a laundry list of reasons. For sure. The same way you have a wish list, which is a laundry list of wish list. But in the long run, usually these reasons why become irrelevant, because we don't move to move. We move to live. The move
Right.
is just the movement towards a life abroad. And when you do live abroad, at least 50% of those reasons why, political situation, violence, da da da, they're not on your radar anymore. Your baseline changes. I'll give you my own example. I used to live in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo has 18 million people in one city. That's two Portugals in one city, okay? So the traffic is horrendous, horrendous. I can't, so I was used to getting traffic jams. Then I moved to Portugal and I was like, in the beginning, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I go everywhere in 10 minutes. And then after a while, oh my God, I'm 15 minutes here and this
Yeah.
doesn't move. What's happening? Because our baseline changes. We forget about the past. It's no longer on our radar. So that's why we don't move away from things, we move towards something. And if I hadn't had very clear the purpose and and the reason, the what I had moved for, it's easy to blame everything else because there's traffic.
Absolutely. No, it totally makes sense. And it is something I'm experiencing. I think everyone does. And having when you were saying that, it equated it to me when people say they're really excited about the wedding, but they never talk about the marriage. Like,
Exactly. Right on. Nailed it.
Right in that space. So I know we have people watching, and we want to make sure, feel free to send out the questions, because we have a lot of different folks that are coming to this from different backgrounds. And we've been talking about Lisbon a lot. I know that is usually the center of where a lot of families start looking when they consider Portugal. But again, the north up in Porto, being in the center in Coimbra, the Algarve has a variety of choices as well. Portugal isn't just limited to Lisbon for international schools, for private schools. You have private public schools, which always is a little confusing because they're like partially funded. And there are totally public schools that are actually great reputations for
Absolutely.
children.
Some are really great.
Absolutely.
Actually,
We have
the one near my house, the Secundária de Miraflores, is considered the top ranking in high schools in Portugal, and it's completely public. So the fact that it's public or private doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It's just
and doesn't
paid by the government or paid by your pocket.
Exactly. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has English programs or not either, because a private school could be all Portuguese or could have an English element to it. And we can absolutely, see different elements, different schools. So what do we think? Easily overlooked. Hey, John. Hey, guys. Are there any easily overlooked pitfalls when moving with children?
I wonder what he means by pitfalls, but I'll start answering and maybe he'll clarify. One thing that some people overlook is child care and support system. So if you have small children and you're used to having a grandmother or a support system or extended family help out, when you move to another country, you most likely won't have that. You will have to pay for childcare, a nanny, a babysitter, whatever. That means that as a couple, you won't be able to drop your kid off at grandma's house and go out for a date.
Exactly.
So that's a change in the dynamic of the family. Many people are very conscious of taking their kids away from the presence of that extended family. So I've heard many people, and this is one of the aspects that expat guilt can manifest, when you feel guilty that you're preventing your child to be with their grandparents and your parents being with your child as well. So these are just some examples. So John clarified small things that become big things. There you go. There's an example. Small things. Yeah, no worries. We'll get a babysitter to go to the movies. And then the babysitter cancels because she has the flu. And then you realize that you're paying 150 euro a month for a babysitter because you want to go on a date every weekend.
Yeah.
Things like that. In the beginning, yeah, no big deal.
This speaks the language. You know,
exactly.
It's not like finding a baby. There's lots of folks that would babysit, perhaps, but do they speak the language? Are they going to be able to communicate?
And it's not so common to babysit. I mean, it's not something like the States where, a 16-year-old will babysit a 2-year-old. That's not how it happens here. It's a little bit developing a little bit more in the urban centers, but in smaller cities, you won't find babysitters easily. That's not a thing because, again, Portugal is a very family-oriented country. And who needs babysitters when you have grandma, right?
Exactly. So, when you come over and you don't, unless you've been grandma, you don't
exactly.
you don't have you. Okay, so Donna has a question here. I can read that here for you. So thank you so much for your insight. For parents that have children that have anxiety and ADHD, what is the support? Oops, the question dropped. I don't have the question in front of me anymore. Let's see. I think it was support about children with ADHD and with different, maybe perhaps development needs. So perhaps, let me get back here. For some reason, my did you catch it, Deborah?
I caught like the gist of it. Okay, there it is. Is it international school better? Okay, so I think that look, again, I'm not a specialist. I'm not a physician. I'm not a child psychologist. So what I'm going to say is what I see in everyday life with my child's friends, etc. In these situations, I think that one big thing to consider is language. Okay. If language barriers are in itself in quote unquote normal circumstances already difficult, in situations that there is a specific condition, whatever it is, let it be mental, physical, doesn't matter, there is another layer of concern because of the communication or lack of thereof. Okay. Is an international school. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just
international schools. I don't know, to be honest. I have to be honest. I don't know enough about international schools. I can only speak for the one that my daughter goes to in Lisbon. I don't know if they're equipped. They do have psychologists there. In theory, they do have it. In practice, who knows?
So we have some experience with some of our clients that are moving with children that have some different developmental situations, including ADHD and autism. The neurodivergent children. In Torres Vedras, for example, has an international school that has been very responsive and able to connect. And our clients have chosen that school specifically because they seem to have a very developed plan for working with children in these spaces. And what we had happen and what they've been doing is they have been setting up the appointments and referring for the therapists and then the support people within the school there. There's also an international school in Porto that we have a couple of children up there that are needing some extra support, and the school was very able to navigate that. As far as picking pediatricians, one of our partners is Serenity, and they are a healthcare concierge. And one of the reasons we recommend for families something like this is you're going to need healthcare. Your children are going to need healthcare. And then if you already know that you're coming with something where you want to keep a specific schedule and cadence and get your child immediately into a rhythm with a doctor, they are the type of service and someone that they speak English, you can have a case manager, and they can do the heavy lifting for finding the type of folks that you're going to need to support your child. So there are tools out there. And when you are looking at someone with a youngster, especially when you're considering moving, doesn't mean you can't move. It's just, I think, Deborah, you said this earlier, it's just another thing. You need to layer that into your consideration and really plan ahead. So I think we can take the question down now, but that's a great question, Anna, because there's a lot of people that are trying to navigate this and figuring out what they're going to do with these different situations.
Yeah, that probably would be a non-negotiable. So I've had clients, for example, that have had some sort of transplant, and they need to be within 15, 20 minutes drive from a hospital specialized in their situation, which is like parallel to this. So for them, when they were going through that methodology, that was like a blockbuster non-negotiable.
Right.
So they actually, what they did was they put on the Google Maps where the hospital was and put a radius around it.
Exactly.
And this is the area that is feasible for me.
Yeah. Well, we are almost out of time. So I want to make sure if there's any other questions or anything else people want to discuss, please feel free to post your question. Deborah, you have been fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to share this with me. We definitely have so many folks considering moving to Portugal that we want to continue to provide information on the fact that my advice coming from my position is planning. Work with folks that can help you wherever you're at. And so, for example, if healthcare is your major concern, find those folks that can help you navigate that. We have a lot of different resources ourselves, but there are choices in Portugal, and we encourage you to do your research and dig in and really plan. That is the best piece of advice I can give for moving with children. And Deborah, if you have any closing thoughts, we definitely love to hear them from you as well.
Yeah. Well, my closing thought is kids mirror adults. So if the adult is taking care of themselves, is managing their emotions, is dealing with things in, a structured way, is planning, knows what to expect, and is not giving in to anxiety because overwhelm and anxiety will happen. That's almost a certainty.
That's a guarantee.
That's a guarantee. Yes. If they know how to deal with it, then you are, even without knowing, giving the child the tools to deal with that also. Because children do what we do. They don't do what we say. They do what we do. So if we're taking care of ourselves, if we're managing, if we're articulating, if we're talking about our emotions, if we're telling, what, I'm scared, or let's do this together, the chances of success are increased millionfold.
I think that's a great point. And I'm so thrilled to have you with us, Deborah. Your services have been invaluable to our clients, to myself. You've been an amazing part of our Portugal the Place journey. And I know we will put this up recorded, and we will keep it out and available. And we will make sure that your information, and they can go to your website if they want to learn more. And if they want to book a session, they can go directly to your website.
My website has a free ebook, has a free international relocation starter course. Next week, we're going to have another edition of the Expat Connection live chat, which is a free webinar. I have more than 120 videos on my YouTube channel. So there are tons of free resources to help navigate this. And with Portugal the Place, there's also the 2 courses included that include 2 one-hour calls with me. So if that's not a lot of resources, I don't know what is.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us tonight. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I look forward to next time that we can do this. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Fiona, for being in the back.
Thanks, Fiona. Bye.
Bye.